Welcome, everyone. We're excited to present Kerry Gray Harrison with the Texas Discovery Gardens. She has graciously agreed to present today. She's going to talk about bringing native plants to Texas Discovery Gardens. She is a fellow NIPSOT member, and the gardens, I'm sorry?
Sort of.
She is the current garden manager at TDG. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Interior Design from UT Austin. She's got a Bachelor of Science from Botany from the University of Maine. She also has a Master's of Landscape Architecture from UTA. Prior to TDG, she was the project coordinator of Cool Schools with the Texas Trees Foundation. On a personal note, she is an avid hiker and enjoys traveling with her geologist turned software developer husband. And she is never without pockets to store seeds and greatly enjoys photographing weeds growing through sidewalks in cities on a quiet Sunday morning. So thank you so much, Kerry, for agreeing to be with us. Without further ado, take it away.
Right. Let me share it back. All right, we should be sharing again.
Looks good.
All right. Thank you very much, Cindy, and thanks for inviting me, NIPSOT, because it was really a lot of fun putting this presentation together to go back and look through a lot of old photos and a lot of drawings and see what all has been happening over the very long history of Texas Discovery Gardens. So this is just an outline of what I'm going to talk about. Just you already gave an introduction of me, so I can skip that. And then a little history of Texas Discovery Gardens because it goes back a long way. And then I want to talk specifically about these 3 gardens that are already planted in order. And then briefly talk about some of the future plans. And then if we have time, I'll discuss a little bit of the challenges because it's not really all that easy to get all of this stuff changed out and planted and purchased and sourced and all that. So moving on. Make sure we can go down. There we go. So again, a little bit about me. This is snowberry clearwing, I think. It might be hummingbird moth egg that laid right as I was taking photos this past week. So I had to include that. And here's a couple of fall photos. This is the Johnson Pond, the square pond right outside the building, which looks really lovely as the Japanese maples are turning color. And so for those of you who haven't been to Texas Discovery Gardens, it's in Dallas and it's in Fair Park, which is a city park with the city of Dallas. And the park, Fair Park itself was acquired by City of Dallas in 1904. So it's been a park for a long time. And even before that, what was called the Dallas State Fair was held on those grounds since 1886. So there's been a lot of activity going on at this area in Dallas for a long time. This building right here is where our offices are currently housed. And it was built in 1936 for the Texas Centennial. It was called Hall of Horticulture then, and in this plan that was put together right after the Centennial, you can see what becomes the Discovery Gardens down here, and this is the building. And then after a few years, it was actually chartered as Dallas Garden Center, and served during World War II. This building served during World War II as the ration board headquarters. And then after World War II, they started putting in a lot of the gardens and added the Grand Hall, which is where the Native Plant Symposium was held year before last and the year before that. The big glass windowed hall in the back on the other side of this entrance. And in the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of gardens built, and that was mostly by Joe Lambert, who was a well-known landscape architect in Dallas. And most of his gardens are close to the building. So as you walk out into the gardens, they're the geometric shapes. The Johnson Tribute Garden, the circular lawn, the pond, the Callier Garden, those are all built during those years. Then in '88, the Grand Allée was finished with the fountain and the beautiful alley with the Savannah hollies. And just 20 years ago, the name was changed from Dallas Horticulture Center to Texas Discovery Gardens. And one of the latest big events was in 2012 when the grand opening for the Butterfly House was held. So that was a big addition right here. And our current vision, which seems to be changing a little bit, is for every visitor to leave with the knowledge and desire to emulate our sustainable practices at home. So a big part of what we do has been educational groups, school groups, and led tours and butterflies, tagging and butterfly workshops. We aren't doing a lot of that right now, as you might imagine. But I was looking back through some of the history and looked at one of the older visions. And even though this is a really wordy one, I think it's really nice on how it specifically calls out restore, conserve, and preserve. And it talks about butterflies, bugs, and botany, because that's really where it is, right? That's what we're all about, butterflies, bugs, and botany. And whenever these visions were put together, I think it was a big shift in looking at gardens as a showplace. So this gorgeous photo is from the Arboretum in the springtime, showing their tulips and the flowering trees, and it's just so beautiful. But if you think about sort of the sustainability and ecology of that, there's not a whole lot to it. There's really no place for insects to lay eggs because they aren't going to be feeding on tulips. And there's a lot of input going into this because they're going to pull out all the tulips and then till it. And there's a lot of shipping and gas involved with that. So just looking at gardens shifting from a showplace to a habitat, and a lot of botanic gardens have done this in the past few decades. So as a habitat, you still have gorgeous flowers and you still have foliage, but you've got a lot of insects, you have flowers for nectar, you have leaves to feed caterpillars, and so you have a whole food web and ecosystem going on here. And Joe Lambert, again, one of the reasons that we have so many exotic plants at the Discovery Gardens is because of just the way people thought about gardens as showplaces back when these were built. So Joe Lambert was well known in society circles. There's a photograph here with him and his wife with Wallace Simpson of British fame. And Joe was known as bringing azaleas to Dallas. And so if you think about azaleas and all the input that you have to have, you kind of can realize how gardens might be showplaces. Instead of showing off how sophisticated you are with the smartwatch, you show off how sophisticated you are with all of these plants that have to be very carefully cared for and have to have a lot of soil amendments and have to have gardeners to watch after them every single day. So azaleas do well in a pH of 4.5 to 6.0. However, if we have blackland prairie soil here, gumbo, that pH is going to be somewhere around 8.3. So that's much, much more alkaline than what azaleas will be happy with. And looking at what a big influence he was, we still have a few azaleas left on the ground even today, many years later. Another photo of one of our very beautiful but very exotic planting areas is the Johnson Tribute Garden. It's also called the Square Pond, and this is a wonderful place to sit on the bench and kind of get away from everything. The water sounds nice, there's lots of shade, there's lots of shadows, it's really pretty. And it also has lots of exotics. Japanese maples here, ginger plants here, fatsia, hellebores, airplane plants, all kinds of good stuff from all over the world. And in 1988, when the Grand Allée was planted, again, natives weren't really a part of that. And so we have this photo from 2008 with azaleas planted, what would have been back behind the benches here. So you can see the bench right there. And lots of mondo grass and all kinds of other things. Back in the very back, we have Chinese abelia. It's great to hunt for monarchs for tagging whenever they're going through. You always know you can find them or take photographs of them there. But they don't provide much food for caterpillars. And same thing for savanna hollies. Really nice, but definitely not native plants. And so what I've tried to start doing is walking through some of the grounds to kind of mark what we do have. So I use a drawing sort of like this. So you can see the brown ink right here is marking out exotics. Live oaks I'm considering exotic. I'm sure you can have your own opinion about that. And then the greens are definitely blackland prairie native plants. So you can see in this front garden, this is MLK Boulevard right here. So this is the dry bed that runs through. It's called the Welcome Garden. And we have very few native plants right there. And so I've kind of made an estimate. I know this image over here is pretty confusing, but if you think of each one of these rectangles being about 2% of our property, and just, you know, overlooking hardscape, overlooking water features, just as if this were all planted, each one of these rectangles is about 2%. And so what I think we have is about 10% of our plants originating in the Blackland Prairie. So that's the green areas that you see here that I've colored in. And maybe about 15% more originating in surrounding regions. So anywhere in Texas or up to Oklahoma or Arizona, New Mexico, or the eastern part of Louisiana, I'm including in that. And because we have so much turf, which is Bermuda, I think about 75% of our ground level plantings, this is not the overstory, just what's on the ground, is exotic. So from somewhere really on the other side of the continent or from other continents. So what I'd like to do, and Dick, if you're listening to this, I haven't discussed this with you yet, but I'd really like to make our ground level plantings around 50% by 2026. So that would be the 90th year anniversary of the Discovery Gardens. All right, that's a little bit of our history, 90-something years, or almost 90 years history. So I want to talk about some of our native areas. And the one that I really had hoped I could talk to everyone in person and do some interviews was Benny Simpson, because I know there are a lot of you that helped with that installation in 1996. And then we'll talk about the butterfly habitat in Conservation Canyon, which is the very newest one, and then on from there. So Benny Simpson was a horticulturalist who worked at what is now the AgriLife Center in North Dallas. And would go out to West Texas and find plants that he thought would do well in Dallas and bring them back here and put them into development in horticulture. And part of his private collection is at the AgriLife Center, but part of it is at Texas Discovery Gardens. And so if you see on this diagram right here, the red area is close to the greenhouse, right on that slope that leads down into what was Ranger Drive. And then there's some outside the fence. And then I have this aerial here. If you see, that's the Grand Allée, that's the Grand Allée. Benny Simpson, it's all outside the fence here, and then also in this parking lot. So this is gate 6 right here, which is currently closed, but you drive by here. And if you're coming into the Discovery Gardens, you'll usually park in this parking lot. all of the center area is part of that original design of Benny Simpson's, and then these areas as well. So that's really one of the largest gardens that we have on our site. There were originally about 12, maybe 14 trees in this original design, and this canopy has closed up completely in the past 24 years. So this is an image looking across, and you can see it's just all in shade. You can't really distinguish much from that. So what was full sun is now a lot of shade. And this is the design that I have that was in our records. And there's no name, so I don't know who put this together. But you can see he has Trans-Pecos areas, Rio Grande Plains areas, and Edwards Plateau right here. Edwards Plateau is the area in the parking lot. And if you look at this dimension right here in the drawing, that's about 30-something feet. So all these little trees were drawn to be only about 8 feet wide or so. And of course, they matured much larger than that. So remember to draw your trees at mature size, because this is all completely closed canopy. And this is a list of some of the trees. Most of them are still there. They're doing well, but this one is gone. This is the screwbean mesquite. We don't have any of those trees left on the property, but I hope to get one back. We're trying. And there are a few more plants on his diagram that I'd like to bring in as well. We have lots of snake herbs, so that's easy. And we can probably find some Eulenbergia rigens or rigens, don't know how it's pronounced, and a few of these too. I'd like to get a smoke tree. I think we could put one back where it was originally. And some of the yuccas should be easy to get. And we already have plenty of the penstemon around in other areas on site. And the plum, the creek plum, Prunus ribularis, would be really nice to get one of those back, or several of them back in the area. Don't think we're going to get Texas snowbell. It's endangered, so probably pretty small chances on that one. But we do have a lot of these other plants, not necessarily where it was originally designed, but a lot of them, because they like more full sun, are doing really well outside the fence. So we've got the false indigo bush. It's just huge, it's gorgeous. We have several of the desert willows planted around our grounds. And one of my personal favorites, the evergreen sumac. We have 2 of these, and we made cuttings in the early part of the summer, and now we have about 8, I think, that have survived from cuttings, and so they're for sale. Few more, Dahlia greggii, which is host to just all kinds of things. And we have this beautiful yellow flame acanthus in the very front part of our grounds, close to the gate. And believe it or not, we have a persimmon tree, Texas persimmon tree, that's been producing seeds like crazy. And so the way I collect them is wait until the squirrels or whatever mammals eat them, and they just leave the seeds up on the border of the fence where the concrete is. They just hop up there and probably chew and then drop the seeds, so it's really easy to collect them. And so that's our, oh, sorry, I just scared a cat. That's our first garden and our oldest native plant garden. The next native butterfly, or the next native garden I want to talk about is the native butterfly habitat. So this garden is right here, close to the Grand Allée, back on the east side, between the fountain and our greenhouses. It was first installed in about 2015, and Roger put in a lot of time researching all of the insect and plant associations for this garden. And it's one thing to want to note that here on the front sign to the garden, that Tom Eisner, an entomologist at Cornell, said that bugs are not going to inherit the earth, they own it now, so we might as well make peace with the landlord. And that's what this garden is all about. So this is one of Roger's original drawings, and it's a little hard to read, as are his handwritten notes. So each one of these little beds has maybe 15 to 20 different plants that are supposed to be there. It's kind of hard to see if they are still there, but I think a lot of them have probably died out because they were shaded from the more aggressive plants. So I think we have about 300 something species altogether just in this one garden. And this was the old butterfly garden with the concrete surrounds, and then it's expanded about 3 times its size. So what I'm trying to do is take Roger's drawings and then put them into digital form. So this is one rendering of those areas. And then I want to take each planted area, say the Fritillary Freeway, we have 2 parts to that, and document what passiflora are still there, which ones he originally designed, which ones we can put back in, and which ones we know aren't going to survive and just kind of give up and move on. So it's the same for each one of these little areas. Blues Boulevard, Monarch Meander. This one is doing well because the frostweed is pretty aggressive. And so this particular area is a great place to hang out and watch monarchs on the migration. And just a reminder about the importance of these host plants. A lot of butterflies will take nectar from any plant, but most caterpillars are fairly picky about what they eat. Not all of them. This is Cecropia silk moth, and it has a wide range of foliage that it will eat. These I raised this past summer, so some of you have seen them in person as they were growing. But caterpillars are especially valuable to the food web. If you are able to join us for the Native Plant Symposium when Dr. Talamy was there, he made note that caterpillars were so important because they're squishy. And so parent birds are in a big hurry to feed their babies, and they just jam the caterpillars down the baby's throat. And so the caterpillars are great food, and you have to have host plants in order to have caterpillars. And if you don't know about his native plant finders with the National Wildlife Federation and University of Delaware, this is the link to that. So, or you can just search for Talamy and Native Plant Finder and it will take you there. It's a really great website, and it's a great way to see what kind of insects we can expect to find in the gardens, especially in these native areas, with the plants that we're able to get. So Butterfly Garden was started in 2015. So this little guy right here is probably about 10, 15, well, maybe 12 feet tall right now. So it's grown pretty quickly. It's a prickly ash. This is an aerial from December of 2015 showing that the beds have been marked out, but they aren't planted yet. And then I have this photo of Milton and Roger doing irrigation installation in December of 2017. I was glad I finally found that. Had to go back a ways. And just some more photos of the different caterpillars and butterflies that we've seen in this garden, especially the swallowtail that imitates bird poop, that likes to be on any of the prickly ash or citrus. We have quite a few of them right now on hop ash in the garden. And then of course the monarchs. This is a great place to get photos, and it's really nice that the migration coincides with the State Fair of Texas. So we usually have a lot of visitors coming through the garden right in time to see the monarchs. So it's really a lot of fun for people, especially that haven't seen them before. And a few more shots of monarchs because it was just such good weather and they were out in force. And one of the challenges is the Monarch Mansion right here. You can see there's a sculpture of Monarch by, I think it's Hank Black, in 2017 maybe. That one was finished. This is a tough area. It's really challenging. So this is the soil that was originally put in there, and I don't know what it is about the soil, but the milkweed just do not like it. So we have some Asclepias curassatica right here, the tropical milkweed, but I have tried, and I know that Roger tried to get some of the viridis and the antelope horns to grow, and they just don't like the soil. So that's one of the things that I will try to do this winter is dig up some of the soil and put in some clay and see if we can't get a nice patch of some of our native milkweeds growing right here, right at the Monarch Mansion. And then moving on to our last garden. This is Conservation Canyon. So this is a recent photo of what this looks like. And this is where it's located on the grounds. So it's on the slope of what was Ranger Drive. So this drive used to come all the way through here. You can see from one of the very early, one of the first slides. And that's just a stub that's left. And it wasn't particularly attractive because it was mostly asphalt. So Blackland Prairie is critically endangered. It's really tough to find. Just a tiny fraction of a percent is left. But we have lots and lots of asphalt and concrete, especially in the city. And so the idea behind this garden was to look at, especially not only native plants, but because we can't get by the fact that it's a storm drain, how to handle that. So if you look at all of this concrete and asphalt around where we're located in Fair Park and then our surrounding neighborhood, it's a lot, and there's a lot of runoff. Compare that to some place that's undeveloped right on the Trinity River, lots of trees. Rain doesn't disturb the soil very much because it's slowed down a lot with all of that vegetation. And then compare that to a residential neighborhood. I made these slides for a presentation last year, and this is where I was speaking in North Dallas. So you can see that there's still some tree cover, but there's a lot of runoff. And so what do you do about that? You have to think about it as a bioswale or a, can't think of the word right now, but anyway, we're looking at plants that are really tolerant of water, that can be completely dried out when there's no rain, and that can tolerate being completely soaked for weeks at a time. So what we kept right here were the storm drains, because all of this area, all of the back parking lots, all of First Avenue, all of what is now our plant sales area over here, and most of this traffic circle all drains through that area. So it's probably around 9/10 of an acre. And that's a lot of runoff. We don't have any place to keep that. If we were to build a detention pond, it would fill up a pretty good sized swimming pool. And there's just no place to store that amount of water. And that's just in a 1-inch rainstorm. If we have 2 or 3 inches at a time, that's a lot more than that. So it still has to drain through this area. So the idea was to keep these storm drains, and there's another one right here, intact so that water can run through, and water comes through that gate and then goes through this way. But all of this area fills up whenever there's a storm. And then we have a path going this way and then going back and forth up the slope. And then a little minor path going this way. And then it's kind of changed. We don't have this one going anymore. We're just sticking back and forth across here. So this was a drawing I put together in April, just kind of documenting what had been planted. and what was actually built. Whenever all of this concrete was torn out and asphalt too, it was piled up right here and all taken away. So a lot of the expense was taken away of toxic materials. And you can see that it was pretty deep, quite a few layers, and then very compacted and very lifeless soil underneath. This is one of the views where the clay layer has been put back in. If we had stopped right here, we would have been in good shape. However, we went a little bit further than I had hoped and kept that slope going up, which looks really nice. However, I was really concerned about this Bermuda that's underneath mulch, and sure enough, my worst fears came true because it is a big problem. But you can see here, it's just completely blank slate. We put in a path and then planted around that path. Here's the diagram showing just a little sprout, December 2019. One of the gardeners and my husband dug a ditch, a sort of a Maginot line, if you're a World War II history buff, to keep the bad guys on one side and the good guys on the other. And I took this photograph just this morning, and you can see it's really filled in with Bermuda. It's like it was never covered up. And we're trying to keep this other side free, but it's tough. Another challenge that we had was getting plants to grow. We seeded with all kinds of beautiful flower seeds, all of these native plants, different mixes, and almost all of them died. So that was pretty depressing to watch them germinate and sprout and grow and then turn yellow because of lack of nitrogen, because they're in a foot of mulch. And man, they just kept dying. They just kept growing and kept dying, kept growing, kept dying. This is, these are blue bonnets. So I was really hoping we'd at least get some blue bonnets, but no. This is a photo from one of the areas close to the gate in February that shows ice crystals. You know, they do just fine in freezing weather, doesn't bother them a bit, but just could not get them to grow in Conservation Canyon. However, by June, we finally got a little bit. These are mostly all either the bare root plants that we put in December or some sunflowers that have finally germinated. And you can see one of the gardeners has dug this trench, and my husband reminded me as I was going over these slides that he helped too. So I'm thankful for that, and also for all of our volunteers, because we would not exist without you. So here are some of the successes. This is Texas bluegrass that does well in cool weather. So it's planted all along the stream area. These are some of the wild hyacinths that you can see behind Cindy at Frankfurt Prairie. These are a couple of bulbs that I had purchased from a nursery and wondered where they went. They went to our P.O. box. I didn't know that. The mail people said we didn't have any arrivals, and so maybe 2.5 weeks after these bulbs arrived, we finally got them. And so I got them from Barb. I ran out immediately and put them in the ground, and they were just fine. They sprouted and bloomed and produced a few seeds, which we just sprinkled back. We have all of the big four prairie grasses: switchgrass, big blue stem, little blue stem, and Indian grass, which looks, of course, really nice right now. And the big four were put in bare root from Native American seeds, bare roots. And then some other grasses: Cytodes grama, of course, Texas bluegrass, Texas cupgrass, which is one of my personal favorites. And wow, it's really taken off. It's maybe 6 or 7 feet high. I didn't know it could even get that high. And then, of course, Eastern gamagrass, which has these really unusual flowers. And so I took a few photos of them as they were maturing. Here's the pollen producers, anthers. This is just the crinkled up flower that's just emerging. And then the stigmas, and you can see the immature seeds right here. So turns out those plants did really well, and I'm pretty happy. Another plant that I can't give a presentation without talking about is hackberry. This hackberry tree was already there, and we left it because it is a little ecosystem in itself. Hackberries are often the first trees to be torn down in construction, but they're so important. You can see here, there's a lady beetle larvae. There's a not very good photo, but you can see kind of the silhouettes of galls. I'm not sure which type of galls, but the whatever spiky galls these are, and the round galls, and there's a close-up of the round gall, and these other galls that you always see on hackberry plants. Beautiful bark pattern, another web weaving creature that I can identify. I mean, what's not to like? It's just a great plant. It's a great host plant, and you can always find something interesting going on at this tree. And then here's one of the signs that I put together, just describing what Ranger Drive looked like before, just asphalt and a storage area. And then now we have a lot of great stuff that's growing in there. And these photographs are all taken from Conservation Canyon. So don't you think prairie looks nicer than parking lot? I do. And what my hope is that we can kind of use this as an outdoor classroom, not necessarily for schools, but for anybody involved in construction to see what worked and what didn't if they want to do sort of the same thing at another site. And then finally, wrapping up some of our existing plannings and then moving on to some of the future stuff. Let's see how time, yeah, we got plenty of time. So some of the plants that I'd like to try to get planted this fall if possible. And some of the areas that we really want to focus on are the secret garden. So that's what used to be the rose garden. There's no irrigation there, and it gets quite a bit of shade because the live oaks are starting to overhang. And so it's part sun, part shade. It's a little tricky. And then the VIP suites, what we refer to as the PCH for Portland Cement House. The north side of this building is one of those tricky areas that gets the full blasting western sun in the summertime, and then it's almost completely in the shade the rest of the year. Also no irrigation in that area, so I'm hoping once we get these plants established, they'll be just fine and we don't have to come back in and water by hand. And then another little area here, which is a nice little place that I hardly ever see anyone sitting in, is the Herkheimer Overlook. That's where the Gossip bronze statue is. For that area, we have started planting that with some coralberry. And then I'd like to get a few other plants in there too, because it's on a slope. It's a little difficult to mow down, and it'd be really nice to just have shade plants that produce great flowers. You can find nectaring insects there, and then they also would produce good hosts, good foliage for hosts. Probably put this one a little out of order, but I'll talk about it anyway. It's American basket flower, which has changed names. It's now starts with a P instead of a C, in case you're looking for it. This is the little area next to our wildlife pond. And so Roger has put in some Easter gamma grass there, which is doing beautifully well. And then we put in sort of a mixture of half native plants and half exotic plants. So there's some Brazilian bachelor's button, but I was really happy about how these basket flowers did. We put them in midsummer, so it wasn't something that had been overwintering, yet they're still blooming even today. So they've been great and hopefully are producing a lot of seeds, and we'll have a lot more next year. Back to the secret garden, I'd like to have some wine cups in there, which are larval hosts for these skippers. I'm not an entomologist, so please forgive me if I've gotten the insects wrong. Four-nerve daisies will have along the inside circle, which are also hosts and also almost year-round nectar sources. And then goatweed leafwing, which is one of my favorite butterflies, that feeds on all the different species of crotons. And we have everything from Texabama to the annuals. Those will probably go inside the mealy blue sage, so that they're not quite as obvious, especially if they get eaten. And then also inside the areas away from the sidewalks, because they're prickly, are the prickly poppies. And then we'll have some Texas star, which look wonderful, full of flowers until midsummer and then drop off. And also we've started planting the prairie verbenas in there as well. And then that next area was the VIP suites. This is the little building that's made out of Portland cement, which was supposed to be the house of the future back in 1936. That's still standing. Going outside of our region, Blackland Prairie region, but bringing in some of the West Texas plants, Texas tuberose, well, it's really more south. These guys, which are night bloomers, so they should smell really nice whenever there are evening weddings. And because this area is used a lot for rentals, especially when we have weddings. And then these are doing really well. This is the Transpecus spiderwort. They got a little stomped over the weekend, but they'll recover just fine. They're blooming. There's just enough sun for them, not too much, not too little, and they don't get any supplemental water right now. And then the iron butterfly, which it's a special selection, but it's still a great plant. And ironweeds in our area are larval host to 19 species. And so I'm hoping that that particular one will be a larval host too. And then of course, coralberry, which was planted a few days ago right up here next to the wall. And I'm hoping that next year we'll have some berries and they'll look nice against the paint. And then Herkheimer Overlook, here's the gossip statue. She's really fun. And then the coral berries have been planted back here. We'll put in some of the white aubens in front of that. Also mix in some of the lyre leaf sage and the golden alexanders, which this caterpillar is feeding on golden alexanders that we had back in the plant sales area. That's where I got that photo. And then bring in a few sedges that should do well with all of that shade. And then again, coralberry, lots and lots of coralberry. Because it's a host to the, which moth was this? I think this is Polyphemus. Sorry if I'm wrong on that, but it's just huge. This is my sister's foot. She volunteered at the Wildflower Center, helping them raise moths and butterflies. And I went to visit just in time for this one to emerge. And so we got to release it. And that was a lot of fun. She's not a particularly tall person, but this moth is, you know, well over half of her little tinny shoe. And he's ready to go off and look for a mate. So that's why I like coralberries so much. Not only does it look nice, but it is a host plant for a lot of different things. And that's not even all of them. And then finally, some of the challenges that we have. We're a public garden, so that says a lot right there. We have a lot's going on. So this is one thing that I hear sometimes. I thought it was a weed. It was a weed, and it was a weed. So I got some of the milkweed vine with the little purple flowers and planted maybe 12 plants all throughout here, thinking this is the perfect place for it. It can find sun, it can find shade. It should find exactly what it wants. It'll be great to see this plant because where else can you go to see it? And a few weeks later, I went back to check on it, and another gardener helped me put these plants in there, and he didn't know what had happened. And so I finally asked Derek, and he said, oh yeah, I pulled those out because I thought they were a weed. You didn't mark them. Okay, I can hardly blame him for that. And then this has a tag as being pasture thistle, but it's a dandelion. So it's a beautiful, happy dandelion that's just growing like crazy. The plants around it have gone dormant for the year. And so instead of weeding out the dandelion, we just have it left in the pasture thistle pot. But that's just part of it. And then just when I think something is a weed and can't be pulled out, this is cowwitch vine, I can't remember the name right now, but I was thinking, all right, well, this is growing everywhere. We can finally pull it out. It's just going to take over. We're taking out the morning glories, and then lo and behold, here's this caterpillar. It's a giant caterpillar. I send a picture to my sister. She tells me what it is, and yes, cowwitch vine is one of the host plants for that. So you just can't win sometimes. Also, being part of Fair Park is a little bit of a challenge too. When the state fair comes through, we don't have a lot of say what goes on. So we had the state fair drive-through this year. The day before it started, they came by with herbicide and it just sprayed everything down, which is fine. I can understand. Yeah, you want to get the weeds out of the sidewalk cracks, but this particular area is right in the watershed that goes into Conservation Canyon right here. So luckily we didn't have any rain, and I'm sure it just dried up and went away, and we won't see any ill effects, but ouch. And then another challenge is in finding plants and then growing them. Native plants can be tricky. And this is an inside shot of our greenhouse with our beautiful brand new table. And because it's warm, we have the shade cloth drawn. And whenever the shade cloth is drawn, there's not enough sunlight for seedlings. And so it's sort of a catch-22. What we're going to try to do for January is to get some growing lights put in, but that'll probably be a big chunk of money. So I'm hoping we can, but we'll see. But we do a lot of propagation here. Roseanne heads up that program and has all of her devoted volunteers. And here's one of her successes. This is a golden lead ball little seedling that came from one of the trees on our property. So I think because it's being so shaded out, it produced only about 5 seeds, and then Roseanne got them to germinate. Another challenge, this is in Benny Simpson. It's because this canopy is so closed and it's so shaded, it's shading everything else. And so a lot of these smaller trees, understory trees, are reaching out, trying to get more light, and then they've been tied back. So this is a juniper back here in the background. This is kidneywood, I think, right here. And then you can see that this tie has been there so long that the bark is growing over it. So it's really dangerous for the tree and shouldn't have been allowed to remain for very long. And then finally, to wrap things up, for putting in native plants, if only William Shakespeare had chosen anything. Instead of thinking that a rose is best, I think most of us would agree that any native Texas plant is best. Even milkweed, but definitely penstem and cobea. That's one of the real beauties in our area. So that's about it. I'll wrap things up and thank you. And again, thank you to all of our volunteers, those of you that have helped us out and those of you that won't help, that will help us out maybe someday. All right, and I think we'll take quite a few minutes of questions.
Thank you, Kerry. That was extremely interesting. And I empathize with your problems about people not recognize a plant from a weed.
Yeah, me too.
I
do
had
it
to
too.
laugh at that one.
Yeah.
First question is, what motivated the transition from a showplace approach to a sustainable garden, and when? And kind of in addition to that is what challenges or what issues did you run into to convince people to do it?
Yeah, it wasn't me. So that would have gone back maybe 8 or 9 years ago. I think Randy Johnson was in charge probably back then. So that's probably the motivation, is his devotion to native plants would be my guess. Did that answer everything? There were several parts to that question.
Yeah. I guess the challenge, then you weren't familiar with all the challenges he went through to convince people to do this.
Oh, no. I imagine there would be quite a few, but I don't know what they were.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, I think you mentioned that you felt like live oaks were exotics. Could you give us some information on why you consider that to be?
Oh, you can say they're exotic. I think the species that's used most in horticulture isn't necessarily from our area. I think it's a little further west, and then, or sorry, I'm getting it mixed up. It's more coastal, and there's the other species that's a little further west, but you wouldn't find that many live oaks growing here unless they had been planted by someone. But I could definitely be wrong. I know there's hundreds and hundreds of live oaks, and many of them are hundreds of years old, but it's just how you want to say, is it really native to Blackland Prairie or just our surrounding areas? I think same thing for mesquites too. There's the argument that they were just in southern Texas and then were possibly brought up north by cattle drives. Not an ecologist, so I haven't really researched it.
Okay. And we know you have plant sales. When do you typically have those?
Every month.
Oh, every month.
We have them every month now. They're one of our major money makers right now until all of our field trips and weddings come back. So we've had them at least 2 days every month since March, I think. In August, we went indoors and had just an indoor houseplant sale, but we'll have 2 more days this weekend, Friday and Saturday, and I think there's still probably spots there if somebody's looking for more plants.
So you just go to the Texas Discovery Garden website to find out the details.
It's txdg.org is our website.
Great. Let's see. And another question, what are visitation projections? What is your online visitation?
Online visitation for workshops?
I guess tours into the garden. Is that
we
right?
Don't
Rachel?
have any right now.
No?
So we laid off all of our education department, and there's nobody right now to do that. And I think Dick and the board are looking at trying to get that back together and looking at possible personnel. But right now we're not doing education online. We're trying, but we're not there yet.
Everybody's struggling with that, huh?
Yeah.
I think that's all the questions here. What day of the week? Is the big native Rosa Setigera, I'm not saying that right, Setigera, the big native Rosa still outside the fence?
Yes, I believe it is.
Right.
I think it's still on the fence.
Super.
But
anyone else questions?
I wonder if that's Dr. Shar asking that question.
It is. All right. Well, thank you, Kerry. That was a very interesting presentation, and I love the Discovery Gardens. I'm a member, and I go as often as I can, but obviously haven't been able to go very much recently.
Right,
So
yeah.
thank you very much, and I will turn you back over to Cindy.
All right, thank you.
Thanks again, Kerry. I wanted to thank everybody for joining us. I also wanted to mention one of their other challenges as a public park with the COVID-19 and everybody not being able to visit. Kerry, people are able to visit the gardens, right?
Oh yeah, we've been open since mid-June. And so it was kind of slow at first, but definitely during the State Fair drive-through, we've had a big rebound, excuse me, in visitation. So it's been nice and, well, not crowded, but it's been nice and lively lately. So it's great to see people, especially kids running up and down the lawn, because some of them have been stuck inside for a long time. But yeah, we're definitely open Wednesday through Sundays.
Great. So if anybody wants to help out, please go visit them for the day. I know the monarchs aren't done migrating through. Take a picnic lunch, sit on the alley, and take a look. Go to the butterfly exhibit is still open, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Perfect. Go.
So tropical butterflies inside.
So go visit their plant sale, have a picnic, go to the butterfly garden, and buy early Christmas presents and gift.
Right. Yeah, thanks for that shameless plug.
Hey, I said it. It's okay. So thanks everyone for joining us. I wanted to reach out and let you know what's up next. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. we have Carol Clark. She's going to discuss historic uses of Texas plants, and we hope to see you there. Thank you, Kerry. Thank you everyone for joining.
Right. Thank you. Hope to see you soon. Bye.